times, before promptly turning it back off. I was so out of it at the time, I wasn't sure what was really happening. All I was sure of was that he needed me to keep quiet and remain alert. When the thrashing sound came closer, it was apparent that it was stomping and chanting. They were clapping and chanting about Santa Muerte. Now Adrian doesn't speak Spanish, though he's full Mexican. He just never learned, so I ended up whispering the translation to him. It was like one of those prayers on the candles you can buy. It spoke about asking the Holy Death for a blessing, but I don't remember what they wanted very clearly. What I do remember was the slam of a hand on the hood of the truck and the wild eyes of a boy. He looked to be somewhere between the ages of 18 and 20. Not very old, but not a young teen. He had paint around his dark eyes, and it haunts me in my dreams. To the best of my knowledge, this boy was all who knew of us at the moment. Adrian swore, but he didn't move. Instead, he just watched the boy, and I watched him. Adrian has always been the type of guy who's confrontational, and he's always been insistent on solving any issues we face. And being someone who hates confrontation, I was rather reliant on him to face the issues for me. The boy yelled for others to surround the truck in Spanish. In the moment, something in me snapped, and keeping my eyes trained on the mirror on the passenger side, I told him to reverse, darting my eyes back and forth between the boy and the figures coming out from the cacti, as Adrian reversed and turned in a huge jerky motion, before hitting uneven road. We were originally just parked at the side of the road. The feeling of being watched, hunted even, compelled me to tell him to head downtown, where we ended up spending a few hours at the Shot in the Dark, a cafe that's long since closed. For 2 months following that night, I had gradually got more and more paranoid about it. And although Adrian tried to convince me that I was overreacting, and there were no chance that we'd ever encounter them again, I just couldn't believe him, despite how desperately I wanted to. It was when we were nearing 3 months since that night, when the previously fixed hand dent was back, and heavily multiplied. It was like dozens of hands tried to peel the metal back to get in. I haven't had any other events since Adrian had his truck fixed and sold, but recently he bought a similar one, and the paranoia has been seeping back into my bones. When I'm not at work, I don't leave my house unless I'm going to be indoors, because I can't risk the thought of them finding me again. The thought of them finding me vulnerable, alone or not, it leaves me shaken. I can't remember what they wanted, but I remember the way he smiled when he mentioned wanting to get into the truck and to have us surrounded, and I would rather I never found out what he planned that night. In July of 2016, I went with 3 of my roommates on a camping trip in New Mexico. We decided to hike into the Pecos Wilderness because of the beautiful pictures of the lakes and trails on the preserve. I don't know if camping on the preserve is actually allowed, but we were carefree and didn't check to see if we could. We hiked until we reached one of the lakes. By that time it was dusk, and we were starving and tired. We decided to set up our tents about half a mile from the lake. We brought hot dogs and beans to cook on the fire, classic camping cuisine. We split up to get stuff for the fire, dead branches, twigs, and stones. While getting firewood, I noticed a lot of coyote scat in the area. I made a mental note to keep my pocket knife close, even though coyotes aren't a huge threat. When I came back, I told my friends, but like me, they didn't think much of it. After dinner, we sat talking about things that went on that year. It soon became pitch black, and the only light came from the fire and a couple of electronic lanterns we brought. My roommates went to bed one by one, until, like in normal horror story fashion, I was alone. I sat stoking the fire, making sure it was a controlled burn, before I could brush my teeth and change into sleeping clothes. I walked a half a mile back to the lake with one of the lanterns, and used the lake water to brush my teeth and wash my face. While washing my face, the hair on the back of my neck stood up, and I got the feeling of being watched. I'm crouched at the edge of the lake, realizing how vulnerable I am. Only a pocket knife to defend myself. There could be a deranged camper out there. I stand up, hand in my pocket, on my knife, when I hear coyotes howling. I relax, thinking that it may have just been coyotes watching me, so I walk back to the campsite. I make it back and go into my tent to get sleeping clothes out of my backpack. I'm about to start changing when I hear twigs break. I just thought one of my roommates came back out of their tent to go take a leak. I stuck my head out of the tent when I saw a coyote near the campfire. I froze, trying to take in what's happening. It looked like a coyote, except for a few characteristics. Its eyes were really bright yellow, It looked taller than a normal coyote would be, and it was crouching near the fire, crouching on its hind legs. I'm frozen, being stared down by the coyote when one of the roommates tries to get out of the tent. He sticks a foot and head out before he sees it. He stares and yells, "What is that?" The coyote runs at a breakneck speed into the darkness, but not normally, on its hind legs. My roommate continues to yell and wakes up the others. They ask what happened and we explain to them what we saw. They thought we were trying to fool them and didn't believe a word we said. The roommate and I decided to sleep in the same tent since I was the only one who brought a knife along. We laid there, cramped in the tent, too terrified to sleep when we heard noises. Twigs were snapping around our campsite, as if it was circling around us. We stayed motionless in the tent, not daring to see the time go by on our phones. Eventually, daylight came, and the noises grew further away. Our two roommates didn't hear the noises, and had to force us out of the tent in order to leave. We walked miles back to where we parked our car and decided that we should get a motel and spend the night in Santa Fe. When we get to our room, I immediately Googled the events of what happened the previous night, and learned of the Navajo legend. When you go camping, make sure you have something to protect yourself, and a way to get out of there at an instant. Nothing about my life is exactly what you would call extraordinary. I'm a 25-year-old male who's been cut out of work for about a month now, and single for longer than I can share. Seeing how I live alone in an almost empty apartment complex in the middle of West Virginia, there wasn't much entertainment to be found. I picked up my smoking habit out of boredom more than anything. This means I had to make routine trips outside, a new activity for me. Sadly, my overpriced apartment lacks a back porch or patio to go out and smoke on. However, there is a rarely used park between both apartment buildings, with a few wooden benches amongst weathered swings and playsets. The whole apartment complex is surrounded by practically nothing, other than miles of dense forest and a highway that's a bit off the beaten path, so it's quite a secluded spot. At first, it was pretty relaxing just to sit outside unoccupied, allowing my worries to wander with each drag off my cigarette. However, it only took a few nights before I started to feel uneasy whenever I went outside. Almost as soon as I would step out of my apartment, I would get an overwhelming feeling of being watched, as if a pair of eyes were constantly following me. Although, as soon as I looked towards the thicket of the woods behind me, the feeling would instantly disappear. At first, I shook it off as either being too paranoid, or that perhaps a noisy neighbor was simply spying on me. However, I would soon come to learn that neither of those guesses were correct. I quickly decided that the uncomfortable feeling of being watched wasn't worth the trip outside, so I began to drive around and smoke whenever I got a craving for a cigarette. I smoked nearly half a pack before realizing how long I had been gone just driving around, so I began to make my way back to my apartment. I wondered if perhaps my suspicions was also afraid of whatever was lurking in the woods behind my apartment. I arrived back to my place around sunset. The moon and the sun both hung ominously overhead, cradled by swirling amber skies. As I pulled into the parking lot, I noticed that the door on the second floor of my building had been left open. This seemed odd to me, as I hardly ever see signs of life aside from the empty pizza boxes left outside of the other apartments, and the occasional muffled yet still loud arguing of the couple that lived below me. It wasn't until I got closer that I realized it was actually the front door of my apartment, wide open. Not wanting to investigate in the dark that the encroaching nighttime would bring with it, I crept up my apartment, afraid of what I might find inside. Even though I tried to walk as quietly and carefully as possible, each step boomed and reverberated through the concrete structure. I stopped in my tracks once I reached the top of the stairs. There were large, muddy hoofprints leading into my apartment, but none leading out. Whoever, or whatever had broken in, was still there. Feeling a newfound sense of bravery, I began to creep closer in my apartment, when I suddenly heard a floorboard right next to my door creak. I immediately turned around and booked it down the stairs and back into my car without looking back. Once I got in my car, I locked all the doors before throwing a glance back at my apartment. The first thing my eyes landed on was a leathery, black-clawed hand wrapped around the doorframe. Right above it was a single piercing yellow eye, glaring right at me before quickly retracting itself back into my apartment, slamming the door shut. Regardless of how terrified I was, I couldn't look away from the spot where that person or thing was just seconds before. I was paralyzed in fear for a few moments before eventually snapped myself out of it and searched for my cell phone. I hastily began to dial 911 when I realized how ridiculous it was going to sound when I told them that a black, clawed creature of some sort had broken into my apartment. Regardless, there was absolutely no way that I was going to step foot back into the apartment alone and unarmed. I decided that I would tell the police that someone had broken into my apartment, and I believed that they were still there. It took about 45 minutes before I saw the signature flashing blue and red lights pull into my apartment complex. I promptly met the cop in the cruiser and briefly explained the situation to him, leaving out the part about where the intruder, possibly being inhuman. We walked up the stairs together, with him leading the way and me following behind. He stopped abruptly as soon as we reached the top of the stairs. Even though I was still behind the officer, I could tell his eyeline was still fixed on the hoofprints leading to my apartment. Without hesitation, he slowly but confidently unholstered his handgun and gripped it with both hands, ready to shoot. He told me to stay at the top of the staircase. As he went to investigate further, I watched as he pulled the apartment door open, announcing his presence, and for the intruder to come out with his hands up. There was no response. The following silence hung thick in the air. He began to take a step forward into the apartment when I heard the same floorboard creak again. A quick flash of black jutted out from inside the apartment and slashed the cop across the face before pulling the door shut once again, leaving 4 distinct claw marks engraved in his skin. The cop fell back, stunned, before quickly gaining his composure. He jumped up, pushed past me, nearly tripping over his own 2 feet as he sped down the staircase and back into his cruiser. I yelled out to him, but he didn't even bother to look back. I ran down to try to stop him from leaving, but he had already put the car in reverse. His tires spun furiously in the gravel, throwing a cloud of dust and rocks at me as he sped off. I couldn't believe my own eyes. I shakily dialed 911 once again and explained the situation to the operator, but there was a strange tone in her voice. It was as if she knew something more about all of this than I did. They simply told me that there was nothing else that they could do, and to call again should any other problems arise. If the people who were put in charge to protect couldn't even help me, then what else was I to do? I fell down on my knees, feeling defeated, as tears began to pool in my eyes. Suddenly, I heard the apartment door creak open slowly, followed by 2 thunderous stomps. I felt the creature's eyes staring at the back of my head. I was frozen in terror, afraid to even take a breath or look back. The steps began to get closer, with each one being louder and more doom-laden than the one before. I started to accept my untimely demise when I heard a vehicle squeal into the parking lot. A young girl with ratty brunette hair swung open a passenger door. Her mahogany eyes burned with a rugged ferocity. We didn't even have to exchange words. Her curt demeanor said it all, and I made my way to her car as fast as my feet could carry me. I heard the pace of the footsteps behind me quicken, along with a demonic yet primal growl. I barely had both feet inside the car before it sped off towards the exit. The creature swiped at us one last time, its claws scraping the passenger side of the vehicle. I turned around, locking eyes with the creature once again. Its glowing yellow eyes and a wide, fanged smile faded away, swallowed by the blackness surrounding the edge of the woods. Despite the pure, unbridled terror and confusion I felt at that moment, I somehow knew I would be back. I live in a big house by a country road in Pennsylvania. I love the outdoors. Often I go hiking, hunting, fishing, or ride my ATV whenever I have a day off from work. There's a massive forest behind my house, and I have had countless adventures in those woods. Sometimes during the night, animals visit my backyard. I don't mind. They never cause me any trouble, but I have a security camera that monitors the backyard, just in case. Most of the time it's just deer, foxes, and one time a black bear. There are not a lot of houses in my area, so the animals are essentially my neighbors. Last year, I invited my friends and family to my place for a barbecue cookout during the 4th of July. The adults and I were on the deck telling silly stories of things that happened at work. Their children were either playing in the backyard, shooting Nerf guns at each other, or inside playing games. After the party ended, I cleaned up around the house. Around 10 p.m., I was in the living room watching the news and started to hear loud shrieks coming from the woods. I turned on the lights in the backyard and looked through the kitchen window, but saw nothing. About 10 minutes of driving through the forest, I came across the remains of a deer, covered in claw marks, lying in the dirt. His eyes and tongue were ripped out.
Upon further investigation, there was a massive slit under the belly, and all of its organs were removed. This was rather unusual. It seemed that the deer was attacked by a bear, but I brushed it off and continued to ride my ATV through the forest. After 20 minutes go by, I got thirsty, not by a small rocky cliff or a creek. I drank my water while sitting on the cliff. It was very relaxing, hearing the calm stream of water and the birds chirping in the trees. I saw a red-tailed hawk swoop down into the water and grab a large fish. This was an incredible sight, and things like that is why I love going into the woods. Just when I was about to go back to the ATV and drive home, I noticed that a corpse of a young man was lying at the bottom of the cliff, and red was peeling all over the rocks around the bottom. I walked to a nearby hill and got a closer look, and much like the buck I saw earlier, the corpse was covered in claw marks, and its tongue and eyes and organs were gone. This unsettled me, so I took pictures and showed them to the police when I got home. The police recovered the body for further investigation and told me to contact them if I find anything else suspicious in the forest. After they left, I went to the diner for lunch with my best friend George. Something strange has been going on in the woods, I said. I came across the husk of a deer, later a young man. Both of them have their organs, eyes, and tongue extracted by something. George had a curious look on his face. I recently got a job with the local police. There have been numerous reports of cattle with human corpses in the same condition as the alive. What he told me is unexplainable. Sometimes I think that might be because of abducting people and animals. It's just ridiculous, George said. He drank his coffee and asked the waitress for a refund. He noticed a nervous look on my face. What's wrong? You think aliens are doing this? George laughed. No, not at all. I'm probably still in shock from what I saw in the woods earlier. George nodded his head. I would be spooked too if I was in your shoes. Well, at least you didn't go Logan Paul, recording the body and making a joke out of it, George said. I chuckled from this comment, and after lunch, I headed home. As much as I love the outdoors, I didn't feel safe going into the woods anymore. So I locked all my doors and windows and played my PS4 for the rest of the afternoon. When it got dark outside, I started hearing the same screaming that I had heard last night. I turned the lights on in the backyard, and for a split second saw a pair of big eyes in the woods, reflecting the lights before rushing deep into the woods. I kept hearing screaming throughout the night, so I went to bed with headphones on, listening to relaxing music, and I had a pocket pistol under the pillow, just in case something enters my room. Luckily, I was able to sleep well for the night. When I had breakfast the next morning, I checked the security camera. Nothing came into my backyard until 3:17 a.m. I was shocked at what I saw. A hairy humanoid with 6 long limbs crawled into my backyard. It had dark, shaggy hair hanging from it like an orangutan. There was an arm directly on top of each shoulder. It had big glowing eyes with no pupils, massive claws on each hand, and its mouth gaped open with long, sharp teeth. It was dragging a massive bear covered in claw marks. The creature then began to eat the bear. When the creature finished eating, it came to the back door and scratched on it like it was a dog trying to get inside. When I came home from work that night, I began to hear the same screaming sounds coming from the woods. I was outside and I heard the sound much clearer. It sounded like a dog or a hyena, but much deeper. I could not let this creature harm people and their livestock. I wanted to end this once and for all. I grabbed my hunting shotgun, pocket pistol, cell phone, and flashlight. I then started to walk into the woods. As I journeyed into the woods, the screams echoed all over the place. The creature could be anywhere. Suddenly, I saw it several yards away from me, eating an elk. I carefully aimed my gun at the monster, and then it noticed me. I pulled the trigger and shot it. The beast fell over, but quickly got up, brushing it off. The ape creature gave out an enraged roar and charged me on all 6 limbs. I shot at it 4 more times, but they only slightly knocked the creature back. My gun suddenly jammed, and the creature jumped towards me. I swung my shotgun at its head like a baseball bat. I heard a snap and the creature cried. It fell to the ground, and its top pair of arms snapped its head back in place. The creature snarled at me, and I ran deeper into the woods. I tried shooting at it with my pocket pistol, but the creature got away. Exhausted, I walked back to my house. I checked my phone. It was 11 p.m. I locked everything and went to bed. I woke up at 4 in the morning and started to move away from the house. I headed to a hotel near the highway and asked for a room on the top floor. I spent the rest of the night there sleeping.
I've been at this shelter like about a year ago, and I don't know why, it just feels completely different.
Besides the chandelier,
Like unrecognizable, besides like the shelter itself.
the police investigated my house. All the creatures were gone.
But this is like very basic. There's not much to even show.
As well as some blood around the broken glass. The samples of hair and blood they collected
It
has only
works,
added more
maybe.
mystery to what happened. At first, it didn't seem like anything unusual, but one of the scientists in the crime lab discovered that their chemical makeup wasn't only organic, it seemed to be unexpectedly mechanical, an organic machine. The samples were then sent to a hospital lab for further research. After I got the damage in my house repaired, I adopted a young German Shepherd from the animal clinic.